The rains came like judgment that year, turning the river Niger into a monster that swallowed everything in its path. Chima Okafor watched from the hillside as the muddy waters claimed his small compound in Onitsha, the three-room house his father had built with his own hands, disappearing beneath the churning brown tide. His wife had died 2 years before from malaria, and now the flood took the last physical memory of the life they'd shared together. At 37, Chima was a man carved from the red earth itself. His shoulders were broad from years of hoisting bags of cassava and cocoyam, his hands calloused from wielding cutlasses and hoes under the relentless Nigerian sun. But it wasn't his physical strength that defined him. It was the quiet determination that burned in his chest, the refusal to let hardship break his spirit. When the waters finally receded 3 weeks later, Chima didn't wait for government aid that might never come. He gathered what little he could salvage and made his way to the abandoned colonial-era farmland on the outskirts of Enugu town. The British had left the fields to rot decades ago, and now wild grass grew taller than man, thorny bushes claiming territory that once produced abundant harvests. Chima set up a makeshift shelter using zinc sheets and wooden poles. Every morning before dawn, he would wake and begin the backbreaking work of clearing the land, cutlass in hand. He carved order from chaos, 1 square meter at a time. The elderly women in the village would shake their heads, wondering why this strong man wasted his energy on land that belonged to no one, that would profit him nothing. But Chima had a different vision. This land may be abandoned, but hunger is not, he would say. He planted cassava, maize, and vegetables, working from sunrise until his muscles screamed for rest. When harvest came, he didn't sell the crops for his own gain. Instead, he distributed them among the widows, the elderly, and families struggling to feed their children. The villagers began to call him Chima the Generous, though he never sought recognition. His shelter was barely more than a shed, with gaps in the walls where wind and rain found easy passage. He owned 2 shirts, 1 pair of trousers, and sandals held together by wire. At night, he would lie on his thin mat, muscles aching, and wonder if he would ever have a real home again. Some nights, the loneliness was heavier than the bags of grain he carried. He was strong enough to move mountains, yet he felt invisible, forgotten by the world beyond his small corner of existence. Still, every morning he rose with the sun, because the children needed to eat, because the grandmothers depended on him, because even when the world forgets your worth, you don't have to forget it yourself. The rainy season had been particularly brutal that year. While other farmers complained about their reduced yields, Chima worked twice as hard to ensure the families who depended on him wouldn't go hungry. He developed a system, clearing more land, rotating crops, even building small irrigation channels using discarded plastic pipes he'd found at a construction site. His body bore the evidence of his labor. New scars on his hands from the cutlass, a persistent ache in his lower back, skin darkened even further by constant exposure to the sun. But his eyes still held that spark of hope, that stubborn refusal to surrender to despair. The local church had offered him a small stipend to work as their groundskeeper, but Chima had declined. "Give that money to Mama Ngozi," he'd said. "Her grandson needs school fees." The pastor had looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Chima," even Jesus rested, "you cannot pour from an empty cup." But Chima didn't see it that way. As long as he had strength in his body and breath in his lungs, he would work. The cup wasn't empty. It was being filled by something money couldn't buy. Purpose, dignity, the knowledge that his life, however humble, mattered to people who had even less than he did. Oh, wow! Chima lost everything, but still feeds his village while living in a shack. This man's heart is incredible. If this is touching you, smash that like button and subscribe to Tales by Julius. Drop a comment. Would you have Chima's strength? Next chapter shows who's about to notice him, and it will blow your mind. Share this story. Turn on notifications. Adana Nwachukwu stepped out of Black Range Rover, her designer heels sinking slightly into the red earth. She removed her sunglasses and surveyed the landscape with the practiced eye of someone who had built an empire from nothing. At 44, she was one of West Africa's most successful agricultural investors, a woman who had transformed failing farms into profitable enterprises across 7 countries. Forbes had just named her one of Africa's 50 most powerful women. But success had come at a price. 3 failed engagements to men who loved her money more than her character had left Adana cautious, guarded. Her late mother's words echoed in her mind. Adana, don't let bitterness make you blind. The right man will see you, not your bank account. She had almost stopped believing such a man existed. Her team had identified this abandoned colonial farmland as the perfect location for her new agricultural foundation, a project designed to train young farmers in sustainable practices. She'd flown in from Lagos that morning to personally inspect the site before making the final decision. Her assistant, Emeka, a lanky young man with a tablet perpetually in hand, walked beside her, reviewing the property details. The land records show it's been in use since 1979, Emeka explained. Government ownership, but they've agreed to lease it to us for the project. The soil quality is actually excellent. Just needs... Wait. Adana held up her hand, tilting her head. Do you hear that? A distressed bleating cut through the afternoon air, followed by a sound that made Adana's heart skip. The desperate cries of an animal in pain. Without waiting for her security detail, she hiked up her skirt and ran toward the sound, Emeka scrambling behind her. They found the source in a cleared section of farmland. A massive iroko tree had fallen, its trunk pinning a young goat whose leg was trapped beneath the enormous weight. The animal's cries were becoming weaker, but what stopped Adana in her tracks wasn't the goat. It was a man attempting to lift the tree. Chima had positioned himself at the tree's thickest point, his back pressed against the trunk, legs braced wide. Sweat poured down his face and soaked his faded shirt as he strained with every fiber of his being. The muscles in his neck stood out like cables, his jaw clenched with determination. The tree shifted, rose an inch, then 2. Sir, you'll hurt yourself. Emeka called out. We can bring equipment. But Chima couldn't hear anything except the goat's cries and the roaring in his own ears. With a sound that was part grunt, part prayer, he gave everything he had. The tree lifted higher. Move, he gasped. Someone move it. Adana didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees in the dirt, designer skirt forgotten, and pulled the terrified goat free. The moment the animal was clear, Chima let the tree drop and collapsed his hands and knees, gasping for air. When he finally looked up, his eyes met Adana's. Even through his exhaustion, she saw something that made her breath catch, a gentleness that seemed impossible in a man of such obvious physical power. The goat, Chima wheezed. Is it okay? Adana examined the animal carefully. Bruised, frightened, but alive. Because of you. Chima stood slowly, and Adana realized he was even taller than she thought. He wiped his face with his forearm and managed a tired smile. It belongs to Mama Obioma. She's 85. This goat is like a child to her. Something in Adana's chest tightened. Here was a man who had nearly broken his back for an elderly woman's goat, who spoke of it with such tenderness. Emeka cleared his throat. Madam, we should... Who are you? Adana asked, ignoring her assistant. What are you doing here? Chima gestured at the clear farmland stretching behind them. I work this land. It feeds a village. He said it simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You work it. Adana's business mind immediately kicked in. You mean you lease it from the government? Chima shook his head, looking confused. No one owns it. It was abandoned. I just use it to help people. Emeka pulled Adana aside, whispering urgently, Madam, technically he's squatting on government property. We'll need him to vacate before we start the foundation project. Adana looked back at Chima, who was now gently examining the goat's leg with hands that could lift trees, but touched with impossible care. She thought of the 3 men who had proposed to her, each one performing elaborate displays of wealth and charm. Not one of them would have ruined their clothes to save an old woman's goat. No, Adana said firmly. We're not asking him to leave. I want to know everything about this man and what he's doing here. No way did a billionaire just get on her knees in the dirt to help. And look at how she's looking at Chima. If you're excited about where this is going, smash that like button and subscribe to Tales by Julius. Drop a comment. Do you think Chima realizes who Adana is? Coming up reveals their first real conversation, and it's beautiful. Share this. Turn on notifications. Adana insisted on visiting Chima's shelter before returning to her hotel in town. Emeka protested, citing security concerns and schedule conflicts, but one look from his boss silenced him. They walked through the farmland as the afternoon sun painted the sky orange and gold, Chima leading the way with a rescue goat bleating happily beside him. The makeshift shelter stood at the edge of the cleared land, humble in a way that made Adana's throat tight. Chima had tried to make it presentable, swept the dirt floor clean, arranged his few possessions neatly on a wooden crate that served as furniture. A single pot sat beside a small fire pit. One shirt hung from a nail in the wall, clean but patched. "Please sit," Chima offered, gesturing to the one plastic chair he owned. He remained standing, suddenly self-conscious about his poverty in front of this clearly important woman. Her clothes probably cost more than he'd earned in 5 years. Adana sat, and Emeka stood guard near the entrance like a disapproving sentinel. She studied Chima carefully, noting the intelligence in his eyes, the dignity in his bearing despite his circumstances. "Tell me your story," she said softly. At first, Chima hesitated. He wasn't used to talking about himself. But something about Adana's genuine interest made the words flow. He told her about the flood, about his late wife Amara, about waking up one morning with nothing but his strength and a choice, become bitter or become useful. "So you chose to farm abandoned land and give everything away?" Adana asked, incredulous. "You don't keep anything for yourself?" Chima shrugged. "I keep enough. I have shelter, I eat. The rest, people need it more than I do." He paused, then added quietly, "Besides, when you have nothing, giving makes you feel like you have everything." Those words hit Adana like a physical force. She thought of her mansion in Ikoyi, her apartment in London, her investment portfolio worth hundreds of millions of naira. She gave to charity, yes, but through foundations and tax-deductible donations. This man gave from his own hunger, from his own need. There was a richness in Chima's poverty that shamed her wealth. "What's your dream?" she asked. "If you could have anything, what would it be?" Chima was quiet for a long moment, staring at his callous hands. "A real home, land that's legally mine, so I can teach young people to farm, to be self-sufficient. Maybe," he trailed off, looking embarrassed. "Maybe what?" "Maybe a family again someday. Someone to share the harvest with." His voice was so soft she almost didn't hear it. Adana felt something crack open in her chest, something she kept locked away after her last heartbreak. She stood abruptly, making a decision that would change both their lives. "Chima, I'm Adana in Wachuku. I own Wachuku Agricultural Ventures. I came here today to build a farming foundation on this land, the land you've been clearing and working." She watched his face carefully. Most men, upon learning of her wealth, transformed before her eyes. Their posture changed, became calculated. They smiled differently, spoke differently, seeing not her but her bank account. Chima's reaction was the opposite. He stepped back, literally putting physical distance between them. Something like pain crossed his face. "Then I should leave. This is your land now." "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "That's not what I meant," Adana interrupted. But Chima wasn't finished. "A woman like you," he gestured at her, at himself, at the vast gulf between their worlds. "You need someone with a future, someone with something to offer. I'm just a farmer with nothing." The words hung in the humid air between them. Emeka smirked slightly, clearly thinking this was the end of an awkward situation. But Adana stepped forward, closing the distance Chima had created. "Can I tell you what I see when I look at you?" she asked, her voice carrying an intensity that made Chima meet her eyes. "I see a man who lifts fallen trees to save animals that don't belong to him. I see a man who lost everything but chose to give rather than take. I see a man who lives in a shack but feeds a village." She paused, her next words carefully chosen. "I've met men with penthouses and private jets who don't have a fraction of your character. You're the first man I've met whose heart is larger than his muscles." Chima stared at her, speechless. "I don't want you to leave," Adana continued. "I want to hire you. Be the face of my agricultural foundation. Teach others what you know. Let me provide you with proper land, equipment, resources, not as charity, but because you've already proven you can do more with nothing than most people do with everything. I can't accept that, Chima said firmly, though his voice shook slightly. People would say I'm using you, that I'm after your money. Let them say it. Adana replied with a smile that transformed her face. I've learned that people who matter don't mind, and people who mind don't matter. Besides, this is a job offer, Chima. You'll work hard for it. I don't do charity. I invest in potential. Emeka stepped forward, finally speaking. Madam, perhaps we should discuss this back at the hotel. We'll draw up a contract, Adana continued, ignoring her assistant. Fair salary, housing, training budget. You'll help design and run the foundation. You'll teach young farmers everything you know. Chima's mind reeled. It was too much, too fast. Why? He finally asked. Why me? Adana's answer was simple and devastating in its honesty. Because in 12 years of building my company, I've never met anyone who understood what wealth really means. You're the richest poor man I've ever known. Wait, did she just offer him a job and call him the richest poor man? This woman sees what others miss. If this is making your heart race, smash that like button and subscribe to Tales by Julius. Drop a comment. Is Chima going to say yes or let fear win? What happens next shows his decision. And there's a twist. Share this. Turn on notifications. Chima didn't sleep that night. He lay on his thin mat, staring at the gaps in his zinc roof where stars blinked through, replaying the conversation in his mind. Adana had left her business card. Thick, expensive paper with embossed lettering. She'd told him to think about the offer and call her tomorrow. The goat he'd rescued slept peacefully outside his shelter. Its leg bandaged with cloth Adana had torn from her own expensive blouse without hesitation. That detail kept circling in Chima's mind. She'd ruined designer clothes worth thousands of naira to help an animal, then sat in his dirt-floor shelter without a trace of disgust or condescension. But fear gnawed at him like termites in wood. He'd watched wealthy people his whole life. They moved through the world with easy confidence, speaking languages he didn't understand, making decisions that affected thousands. What did he know about running foundations or teaching programs? He could grow cassava and cocoa yams, lift heavy things, work until exhaustion, but managing a project? Working alongside educated people who would surely see him as the charity case he was? And then there was Adana herself. The way she looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past his poverty to something deeper. It terrified and thrilled him equally. His late wife, Amara, had looked at him that way once. He'd sworn after her death that he'd never risk his heart again. Love was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. Morning came too quickly. Chima forced himself through his routine, washing at the communal well, checking his crops, preparing the day's harvest for distribution. But his hand shook slightly as he worked. Old Mama Obioma noticed. You're troubled, she observed, accepting the basket of vegetables he'd brought her. That woman yesterday, the important one, what did she want? Chima told her everything. Mama Obioma listened quietly, then smiled in a way only the elderly can, carrying wisdom earned through decades of living. My son, she said gently, do you know why this goat matters so much to me? She gestured at the animal, now recovered and eating contentedly. My daughter gave it to me before she moved to Abuja. Said it would keep me company, give me purpose. I thought it was foolish. I'm too old for goat keeping. She fixed Chima with a knowing look. But that creature gave me a reason to wake up every morning. Sometimes God sends us things we think we don't need, don't deserve. Our job isn't to understand why. Our job is to receive the gift. Chima walked back to his shelter, her words heavy in his heart. He picked up Adana's business card, studied the phone number. His old Nokia phone had just enough credit for one call. His thumb hovered over the buttons. What would Amara say if she were here? The memory came suddenly, sharp and clear. They'd been at the market years ago, before she got sick. A man had offered Chima work in the city, good money, but it meant leaving the farm. Chima had refused immediately, saying he belonged to the soil. Amara had touched his face and said, My love, Don't confuse loyalty with fear. Staying isn't always courage. Sometimes courage is trusting that your gifts can grow in new soil. Chima dialed the number. Adana answered on the second ring. Chima? How did you know it was me? He asked, surprised. I saved your number when you gave it to me yesterday, she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. I've been hoping you'd call. I have conditions, Chima said, his voice steadier than he felt. I'm listening. First, I want everything in writing. Clear job description, clear salary. I don't want anyone thinking I'm a kept man or charity case. Done. What else? The foundation has to hire local people, young farmers from the village, people who need real opportunities. And we feed the community while we teach. No one goes hungry while we're building programs. Absolutely. Adana agreed. These are excellent conditions. Anything else? Chima took a deep breath. I need you to understand something. I'm not educated like the people you work with. I'll make mistakes. I'll need time to learn. If you're looking for someone polished and sophisticated, that's not me. There was a pause on the line. When Adana spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. Chima, I have a dozen employees with master's degrees who've never grown a single plant. I have advisors with MBAs who couldn't tell cassava from sweet potato. What I need is someone who understands that agriculture isn't a business. It's a relationship with the earth and the people who depend on it. That's you. When do I start? Chima asked quietly. How about today? My team is still in Enugu. We'll begin the paperwork. Find you proper housing. Start planning the foundation structure. Unless you need more time. No, Chima interrupted. I've wasted enough time being afraid. 3 hours later, Emeka arrived with a car to take Chima to the hotel where Adana's team was working. The young man was professionally polite, but his skepticism was obvious. In the plush hotel conference room, Chima felt massively out of place among the laptops and bottled water and people speaking in acronyms he didn't understand. But then Adana entered, her presence commanding the room. She sat beside Chima, not at the head of the table. A subtle message to everyone present. This is Chima Okafor, she announced. He's the heart of this foundation. Everything we design, every program we create, runs through him first. If it doesn't serve the farmers he spent years helping, we don't do it. Around the table, expressions range from curiosity to doubt. A middle-aged woman named Ngozi, the foundation's proposed director, spoke up. With respect, Ms. Nwachukwu, shouldn't we hire someone with agricultural development experience? Perhaps an NGO background. We'll hire those people too, Adana replied calmly. But Chima understands something textbooks can't teach. What it means to farm when everything is against you, and why someone would choose to give their harvest away. That perspective is priceless. For the next 6 hours, they worked. Chima's head spun with terms like sustainability metrics and stakeholder engagement. But when they started discussing actual farming practices and community needs, he came alive. He corrected their assumptions, explained the realities of small-scale farming, described what the village actually needed versus what outsiders thought they needed. Slowly, the skepticism in the room transformed into respect. Even Emeka looked at Chima differently by the end. As they broke for dinner, Ngozi pulled Chima aside. I apologize for my earlier comment. You clearly know what you're talking about. I think we're going to do something really special here. That night, Adana insisted on driving Chima back to his shelter herself, dismissing her security team's protests. You don't have to stay there anymore, she reminded him as they drove through the darkening countryside. We can arrange housing tonight. Tomorrow, Chima said, I want one more night there, to remember where I came from. They sat in silence for a moment outside his shelter. Finally, Adana spoke, her voice soft in the darkness. Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance. I'm still afraid, Chima admitted. Afraid I'll disappoint you. Fear means you care, Adana replied. It means you understand the weight of what we're building. That's exactly the kind of person I need beside me. The words beside me hung in the air between them, carrying meanings neither was quite ready to name. Oh my goodness, did you hear that? Beside me, she said, beside me. This is about to become more than business. If you're screaming right now, smash that like button and subscribe to Tales by Julius. Drop a comment. Are you Team Adana and Chima? The finale shows what happens next, and it's everything. Share this story. Turn on notifications. 6 months transformed everything. The foundation rose from the abandoned farmland like a promise kept. Modern training facilities stood beside traditional farming plots, where Chima taught young farmers the techniques he perfected through years of hard-won experience. Solar panels powered irrigation systems that made the old colonial-era land bloom again. Government officials who'd ignored the property for decades suddenly appeared for photo opportunities. But the real transformation was in Chima himself. He stood in front of a classroom of 25 young farmers, his voice confident as he explained crop rotation principles. Gone was the tattered shirt. He now wore the foundation's uniform, though he'd insisted it be practical work clothes, not fancy suits. He'd learned to use computers, to read reports, to speak in meetings with government ministers and international donors. Yet he remained unchanged in the ways that mattered. Every evening, he still walked through the village, checking on the elderly, ensuring no one went hungry. The foundation's first harvest had been distributed partly as pay for the young farmers they trained, and partly as food for the community's most vulnerable. Some board members had questioned the practice, but Adana had shut down the debate with one sentence. If we're too business-minded to feed hungry people, we've failed before we've started. Adana visited the foundation twice a month, though her responsibilities kept her traveling between Lagos, Abuja, and international investor meetings. Each visit felt like coming home to something she hadn't known she was missing. She watched Chima now through the classroom window, noting how the young farmers hung on his every word. He'd earned their respect not through authority, but through authenticity. He worked beside them in the fields every day, his hands still calloused despite his new position. When the class ended, Chima found Adana waiting outside. His face lit up in a way that made her heart skip. "You didn't tell me you were coming today," he said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "Surprise inspections are part of good management," she teased, falling into step beside him as they walked toward the administrative building. "And what does this inspection reveal?" Chima asked. "That you're terrible at staying in your office and excellent at everything else," Adana replied. "Ngozi tells me enrollment applications have tripled. We're going to need to expand the facilities." "The young people are hungry to learn," Chima said. "Not for food, for purpose. They want to know their lives matter. That farming isn't poverty, but possibility." They reached the small garden Chima had planted beside the office, a quiet space where native flowers bloomed among productive vegetables. It had become their spot, where they talked after her visits, where business gradually gave way to something deeper. "I need to tell you something," Adana said, her voice suddenly nervous. Chima turned to face her, concern in his eyes. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually, and that terrifies me." She took a breath. "Chima, these 6 months working with you have been the best of my life. Not because of the foundation's success, though I'm proud of that, but because of you, the way you see the world, the way you make me want to be better." Chima's heart pounded. He'd felt it too, the growing connection that went beyond professional respect. The way her laugh made his whole day better. The way he found himself counting days until her next visit. The way she'd become the person he wanted to share every small victory with. "Adana," he started, then paused. "I never thought I'd feel this way again after Amara. I told myself it wasn't possible, that I should focus on work, on helping others. But you—" "I know," she whispered. "I told myself successful women, like me, don't find real love. That men only see money. But you see me, just me. I see the woman who got on her knees in the dirt to save a goat," Chima said softly. "I see the person who trusted a poor farmer with her dream. I see someone whose wealth is in her character, not her bank account." They stood close now, the evening sun painting everything gold. Around them, young farmers headed home, calling goodbyes. The smell of fresh earth and growing things filled the air. "I'm still afraid," Chima admitted. "People will say I'm using you, that I'm not good enough for you." "Let them say it," Adana replied, echoing her words from their first real conversation. I've learned that other people's opinions are their problem, not ours. Are you sure? Chima needed to hear it. You could have anyone, someone from your world, with education and polish. Adana placed her hand over his heart. This is my world. You showed me that. Real wealth isn't money. It's integrity, kindness, purpose. You're the richest man I know. Chima covered her hand with his own. I have nothing fancy to offer you. No romantic speeches or expensive gifts. Good. Adana smiled. I have plenty of expensive things. What I need is a partner who understands what really matters. Someone who will build a life with me, not a lifestyle. I can do that, Chima said, his voice rough with emotion. I can give you my whole heart. It's the most valuable thing I own. Then I'm the wealthiest woman in the world, Adana replied. Their first kiss tasted like possibility and promise, like two people who'd spent their lives feeling not quite enough, finally finding someone who saw them as more than enough. News of their relationship spread quickly. Some gossip blogs called it scandal. Billionaire falls for her employee. Others spun it as a fairy tale. Chima's fellow farmers congratulated him with genuine happiness, having watched his loneliness for years. A few foundation board members expressed concerns that Emeka quickly shut down by pointing out that the foundation had never been more successful. 1 year later, they stood together at the foundation's anniversary celebration. Hundreds of young farmers they'd trained filled the grounds, along with village elders, government officials, and international partners. But Chima's eyes were only for Adana, and hers for him. Ngozi gave a speech about the foundation's impact. 300 farmers trained, 5 communities transformed, crop yields increased by 70%. When she called Chima and Adana to the stage, the applause was thunderous. But Chima ignored the prepared remarks. He pulled a small box from his pocket, and the crowd went silent. A year ago, I was a man who'd forgotten his worth, Chima said, his voice carrying across the gathering. I thought I had nothing to offer the world. Then this woman saw value where I saw emptiness. She reminded me that wealth isn't what you have. It's what you give and who you become. He opened the box, revealing a simple ring he commissioned from a local craftsman. The band was made from recycled copper, adorned with a single small stone from the river Niger, the river that had taken us home, but somehow led him here. Adana Nwachukwu, you are the harvest I never knew I was planning for. Will you marry me? Adana's answer was lost in her tears, and her nodded yes. But the crowd heard it in her kiss, in the way she held Chima like he was the most precious thing in the world. Because he was. Not because of his strength or his success or his transformation from poor farmer to foundation leader, but because he'd never forgotten how to be human, how to give, how to see value in others, even when the world told him he had none. 2 months later, they married in a ceremony held on the foundation grounds. Mama Obioma, the goat Chima had saved contentedly grazing nearby, gave Adana away. Young farmers formed an honor guard with hoes instead of swords. Government ministers sat beside village elders, all barriers of class and wealth dissolving in celebration. In his vows, Chima promised to always see Adana's heart before her wealth. In hers, Adana promised to always remember that true richness means having the courage to give. They built a home together on the foundation grounds. Modest by billionaire standards, extraordinary by any measure of love. Their evenings were spent planning expansions, teaching classes, and walking through fields as the sun set over land that had gone from abandoned to abundant. Sometimes late at night, Chima would wake and watch Adana sleep, marveling at the journey that had brought them together, from flood victim to husband of one of Africa's most successful women. But that wasn't the real transformation. The real transformation was learning that he'd never lost his worth. It had been there all along, waiting for someone who knew how to see it. And in teaching him to see himself clearly, Adana had found what she'd been searching for. A man whose wealth was measured in character, whose strength was tempered by gentleness, whose love was as generous as his harvests. The farmer who'd forgotten his worth had finally remembered. And in remembering, he'd helped a billionaire remember too, that money can buy many things, but it cannot buy the kind of richness found in a good man's heart. They got married, and that ring, made from the river that took everything from him. I'm crying. If this story touched your soul, smash that like button and subscribe to Tales by Julius. For more beautiful stories, drop a comment. What did this story teach you about real wealth? Share this video with someone who needs to remember their worth. Turn on all notifications. Thank you for being part of our African Tales family.